this summer I was at a hotel, actually a castle, in Ireland with my family. And for all I know, this was a castle that was built 5 years earlier to look like a very old castle. But it's the type of place where you do rugged outdoor activities during the day and then come back to your room for nice soaps and soaring ceilings in the evening. And it was there where I am quite confident that I am the first person to ever receive a call to be honored by the American Jewish Committee while on a falconry course. There's nothing farther from Zabars than sending out a falcon to eat a ferret. But Bruce Mendelsohn was persistent. He said, "Don't worry, the money will raise itself. You don't have to do anything." Bruce is lovely. He's a tremendous advisor. And Bruce, you are forgiven because you do wear diameter gear on Zooms with our competitors. Keep it up. It's all good. I knew that I had heard of the AJC, but I wasn't certain why or how. Were they the tree people in Israel? They're not, by the way. I learned that they are, full stop, the advocacy group for Jewish people everywhere. If Jewish people or Jewish values are under attack, AJC was probably there already. And in deciding to accept this award and working this year to raise money for this event, it forced me to think a little bit about my own feelings on anti-Semitism, the cause which AJC is most actively aligned with eradicating. And I grew up in New Jersey as an observant Jew, which meant among other things, wearing a kippah everywhere I went. My parents always explained to me that it was both, we're here today, thank you, they always explained to me that it was both a privilege and a responsibility. I was on parade. So if I littered or I was rude, it wasn't me, it was the Jewish kid being rude, the Jewish kid littering. The experience was a good one. The only time I remember taking off my kippah was when I was 7 in Zimbabwe, having just visited my grandfather in South Africa, who fled Berlin before the Holocaust. And in the hotel in Zimbabwe, there was a summit that day between Gaddafi and Mugabe, and they were discussing what to do with Israel, America, and South Africa. And my father felt if they saw a young American boy with a South African dad wearing a kippah, it would be too much for them. But that was it. The rest of the experience, I went skiing with the kippah. Once I decided to wear a headband instead of a hat, the fashion, was very influenced by the 80s. It wasn't a good physics decision, it was very floppy, but no problems. And that positive experience shaped my view of anti-Semitism, despite being the grandchild of 3 or 4 Holocaust survivors. Of anti-Semitism is something that was a scourge of history, a problem for many Jews, but thankfully in the rearview mirror for American Jews. Josh previewed this, and gave me this idea a little bit actually. But I would contrast this with the approach to anti-Semitism that I saw from people who were older than me. I will refer to this as the Uncle Leo approach to anti-Semitism, which for Seinfeld fans you will know, no one just overcooks a burger. Okay, there's a Nazi in the kitchen. This view of anti-Semitism, the Uncle Leo view, sees anti-Semitism everywhere. This didn't work for me. I've reflexively been against it. In fact, recently, my father-in-law, who's also here along with my mother-in-law, sent me an article from Tablet magazine called Vanishing, How American Jews Are Disappearing from Public Life. And without even reading it, I replied immediately, we have the Secretary of State, Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Treasury, the Attorney General, the Senate Majority Leader, and our beloved second gentleman. Quite a vanishing. I even look at this room, which is filled with restructuring professionals, and there are a lot of Jews in restructuring because it was the only filthy profession that we were allowed in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And today, the victory is that there are plenty of goyim falling over themselves to do coercive unsub transactions. And Jews are highly represented in corporate M&A and equity deals. But as Nicole referenced, times are changing, I'm aging. And this weekend, for Mother's Day, I was in the Battery Conservancy in Lower Manhattan with my family and my mother and father. And there's a statue commemorating immigrants. And it really is, the tired, the poor, the huddled masses, really weary-looking immigrants. And I brought my kids over, who are also here, Gabriel and Clara, to look at it, because the guy in the front was wearing a kippah. And there's pride that I take. Lizzie and I are products of the great American immigrant experience in this country. And I thought this was a great statue. And my eternally optimistic mother was the only person who pointed out, why is the Jew the one with his hand out? asking for something. And the change that has, I think, happened in all of our lives is something that we have to deal with our kids. And nothing ages you or makes you grow up more than your kids. So my son Gabriel, he got for his birthday this year in October a pair of Yeezy shoes in the middle of October. And this was days before Kanye's explosive anti-Semitic comments. And I was so proud of him, but also relieved that he made the decision himself not to wear the shoes, to put them away, to begin a race between the growth of his foot and Kanye's hopefully inevitable apology. A few weeks later, a few days later, my colleague Michael Seidman pointed out that Farfetch, a online fashion retailer to which we were a secured lender, was still selling Yeezy shoes on their website. And for all the advisors out there, it's a par loan, there's nothing to do, we're going to find it. And immediately my partner Scott, who is not Jewish, sometimes neurotic, but descended from the Mayflower, he wrote a letter to the company saying, we demand as a stakeholder in this business that you take these shoes off your website. And I supported both these actions. Gabriel putting the shoes away, writing a letter, but I also felt something in the victimization of it, that all of a sudden we needed defending. Many of us in this room are big supporters of freedom of speech, and we mock, many of us, I've been known to do that occasionally, the snowflakes on campuses who conflate the injury you get from physical violence with the feeling of having your feelings hurt. Yet, days after Kanye's horrible comments, our community and our allies impaired his business significantly, both in retribution and as a warning to others. And while I'm so appreciative for my beloved partner's quick action in sending that letter, part of me made me think, why do I need him to stand up for me? I'm not a victim, I wore a kippah skiing, for heaven's sake. And I think that it's not only that issue of victimization that always bothered me a little about Uncle Leo's approach. There's something to anti-Semitism, or the Uncle Leo approach to anti-Semitism, that gives you license. After all, Uncle Leo, for our fans out there, was both a shoplifter and a cheater. Okay? If they're gonna hate you no matter what you do, you may as well do some bad stuff. And, again, to evoke my dad was an equity research analyst, covered insurance stocks. Mine is not a Horatio Alger story. And he was on a business trip to Springfield, Illinois. And the plane to Chicago was canceled, so he hitched a ride with a client. And in the drive, they were talking about the stocks they like. What else are you going to discuss? And he mentioned to this client, I noticed you don't own AIG. AIG, then run by the legendary Hank Greenberg, was my dad's favorite stock at the time. And he said, we think it's a cheap stock, but we make it a practice not to buy companies run by Jews because we find that's where the frauds are. It's a long ride from Springfield to Chicago, for those of you who have done it. I remember as a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old following the insider trading scandals, the shame of the names, Levine, Boesky, Siegel, and later, early in my career, when all anyone could talk about was the Madoff fraud. Recently, I had the opportunity through the UJA to have dinner with Enes Kanter, the former NBA player, who's an outspoken social justice warrior now, who is Muslim and who's a friend of the Jews. And I said to him, how are, most players in the NBA are black. And I said, what is the general feeling amongst that community towards Jews? And he said, very quickly, they know you mostly as the agents and the owners, and they don't like you. Now, that's anti-Semitism. In fact, my friend Mark Lassery, who was a Jew who until recently owned the Bucks, he brought Myers Leonard back to his team, who was suspended by a different team for making anti-Semitic comments on Twitch. But at the same time, it is a lesson that even if we're not wearing kippah, and many of us are not, we're always on parade. Part of what anti-Semitism means is we always have to be better than our enemies want us to be, and it's the only way to protect ourselves, to protect our children, and to last into the future. But Judaism is a synthesis. Like, are we a people? Are we a nation? Are we a religion? Maybe more jocularly, how is it that we're so obsessed with bagels and cream cheese with the prevalence of lactose intolerance in the community? And so that synthesis, I think, ultimately says that I have to appreciate that the period in which I grew up was a vacation from history, not only for inflation and interest rates, from anti-Semitism as well. And it can't necessarily, that personal experience that led me to the views that I had, I think are ending. In reality, as much as I don't like this, there are consistently throughout history anti-Semites in the kitchen. Whether it's the tears from Babylon, the Crusades, the expulsion from England in the 13th century, the killing fields in the Ukraine, the broken glass in Munich, the tarmac in Munich in the Olympics, or the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And for people who took in the Charlottesville events as from a political angle, thinking what it might do to the midterm and their taxes, who do you think they were talking about when they said, "You will not replace us"? It's probably not a coincidence that my mother was the one who recognized the anti-Semitism in that statute, because she's the one who grew up with no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents, no cousins. As much as we want to be the kid who lived carefree, at the end of the day, Lizzie and I, 7 of our 8 grandparents, were Holocaust survivors. And so unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And while we always, I think, need to be better, we have to meet hate with force. We have to be willing to, with advocacy. And that's where I think organizations like AJC come in. Now, we're all here to say how important AJC is, but AJC does have in its very long history a bad moment. It's a bad moment that was shared with the larger American Jewish community, which is during the Holocaust, the American Jewish community did not do everything they could necessarily to protect Jews in Europe. And it's impossible to judge in hindsight. And there were lots of extenuating factors. They didn't have the confidence that we have today, and they didn't have the institutions. We have the institutions. We have our synagogues, the federations, UJA, AJC. If we let them wither, if we say there's someone else's responsibility, then they will not be there when we need them. We think now today, wow, things are really bad, we need them, they could get worse. Supporting these institutions allows AJC and others to be on our college campuses, to be in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, to be at The Hague, to be at the New York City Council. If we don't support it, it won't be there, and history unfortunately is that we'll need it. So thank you for the support, thank you for letting us break the record. Susan was very worried about it, but inflation helps everyone. We really appreciate, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, to speak, to be honored, and tonight, and as always, Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.